Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. I already explained you about Rousseau's introduction, nature of man, state of nature, and Rousseau's theory of social contract. Now I explain you about most important theory of the Rousseau about general will. General will is expression of the public mind. It is emanated from all and is directed to all. It is free act of those who enter into the pact. All their powers and rights are reposed in the community and their respective wills are superseded by the general will. To understand the term general will, it is necessary to understand about actual will and real will. The actual will is the self-regarding and is based on the self-interest and is not related to the well-being of the society. It is of individual will and is impulsive and irrational will. It is narrow and self-centered. Next, the real will. The real will is others regarding and is based on the well-beings of the whole community. It is rational with will and is related with the general welfare of the society. It thinks more of common good or interest than the interest of individual. Therefore, it promotes harmony between the individual and the society. It represents the individual's freedom because it is urged the selfishness. It is based on reason. The habit of self-criticism of average individuals points out to the reality of the real will. An average man has both actual and real will. So, the general will is the sum total of real wills of the individuals in the society, and according to Rousseau, general will plays very important role in the society and state. Rousseau's concept of general will is regarded as living entity of body politics and the greatest contribution to political thought. It gives an organic theory of state leading to collectivism in the place of concept of the state held by the Hobbes and Locke. This theory of general will, which Rousseau identifies with sovereignty, leads some basic aspects. Number one, the body politics taken as a whole may be regarded as an organized living body resembling that of a man. Next, the body politics is moral being possessing of a will. The general will, which tends to preservation and welfare of the society, is the source of laws. The general will constitutes for all the members of the state in their relation to one another and to it the rule what is just and unjust. The most general will is always the most just. The general will is always for common good. The general will is always favorable to the public interest. The sovereignty lies with general will, however, Rousseau makes distinction between sovereignty and government. He refers government to the executive power in the state, while the legislative or law-making powers to the sovereign assembly. The government in no way violates the basic principles of sovereignty, that the general will is inalienable because power may be transmitted but not the will. Rousseau also clearly distinguishes the general will from will of all. The general will take into account the common interest, while the will of all private interest. The general will is sum of particular will but takes away these same will, the pluses, minuses that cancel one and other, and the general will remains as the sum of the differences. Rousseau further explains that the will of all is aggregate of all wills of individuals of the community about their personal interest. And he further differentiate the will of all from the general will in these points. Number 1, the general will is will of community, while the will of all is the sum total of individual wills. Next, the general will is the organized social will, while the will of all is unorganized will of the individuals, which is selfish or even perverse. The general will aims at goodness, well-being, and integrate the present with the future, while the will of all aims at the monetary good of the individuals. The will of all is a mere aggregate, whereas the general will is an organic unity. The essential difference between the will of all and the general will is one of motivation, service of self, or service of community. After examining differences between will of all and general will, now I explain you about some basic and most important characteristics of general will. First characteristic is about unitary. The general will is a rational will and is not self-contradictory. It gives a touch of unity to the national institution. It is therefore unitary. Next characteristic, it is indivisible. It is indivisible and cannot be divided. According to Rousseau, if it is divided, then it cannot be remain general will. Next characteristics, it has a permanent status. According to Rousseau, it is rational and not impulsive. It springs from the genius of the people. It is not eternal but permanent and imparts stability to national institutions and has a permanent status in the state. Next, He also considers general will as a right will because it is willing for the welfare of the society. It is based on ethical and moral considerations. Therefore, it is a right will. Next, it is inalienable. General will is inalienable as Rousseau locates sovereignty in general will, and the sovereignty is as inalienable as life of an individual is inalienable. Thus, the sovereign general will cannot relinquish sovereignty. Last characteristic of general will is that it is unrepresentable. General will leads to the nation of direct democracy. It is therefore general will is unrepresentable. So, after examining basic characteristics about general will of Rousseau, now I explain you about positive aspects or its merits. Number one, the theory of general will is sovereign and leads to the healthy nation, which is basis of the state. The true basis of democracy is not force nor even passive consent, but active and selfless will. The theory also emphasizes on general good being the objective of the state. It converts the individual interest into the social and moral. The theory of general will becomes the main cause for maintaining justice and law, which represents a man's reason and which also force him to be free from his basic tendencies. The theory of general will emphasizes the corporate character of society in which an isolated selfish is misfit. He attempts to synthesize good government of Hobbes and self-government of Locke in his concept of general will, which does the best for the community. The theory of general will reconciles the absolutism of Hobbes and constitutionalism of Locke. It fills the gaps which are left by the theories of social contract of Hobbes and Locke. The continuous participation and consent by the individuals in the government established through general will. The theory of general will reconciles the liberty of individual with the authority of the state because liberty is regulated by laws in making of which he is himself a party, which turns a citizen from a passive into an active citizen. Rousseau further explained that the theory of general will integrates the individual with the state as well as with the society because the real will of individual goes into making of the general will which seeks the good of individual in the content of good of the society. It also transfers political obligation from a legal into an ethical obligation. While examining about Rousseau's views about theory of general will, its basic characteristics and its most important aspects. Now I briefly explain you about some major critical aspects of his theory of general will. Rousseau's theory of general will is incomplete and is not a very clear. He regards it as a kind of arithmetical balance, and it is unsound because the collective opinion is not the nature of a balance of or average. Most important critical aspect of his theory is that general will is difficult to differentiate with the will of all. The general will is not the will of everybody in the community because that will merely be will of all, nor it is will of majority, though it may be clearly differentiated and also connected with the will of all. So, the theory of general will of Rousseau is divided into essential and non-essential wills, as the essential wills combine to make the general will. However, one cannot divide the will into essential and not essential will because an individual will is corporate thing and one complete whole. The theory of general will fails to reconcile individual freedom with the authority of general will representing the community. Rousseau advocates clearly about the importance of general will, but practically, general will may not be in the best interest of all individuals in the state. Rousseau's theory of general will is abstract and narrow in nature. In actual practice, it is nothing if it does not mean the will of the majority. The theory of general will leads to a conception of the state as a super entity distinct from the organic elements. The individuals who sacrifice themselves for the sake of the state. It is a case of means becoming an end. Rousseau again distinguishes between state, the government, but in actual practice, the government has the unlimited sovereign powers of the state at its disposal, which may lead to tyranny of the government. Rousseau's theory of general will's next critical point is that the general will points common interest which is difficult to define or determine. Common interest grow out of organic relations among the members of a community which are hardly possible in multinational state. The theory of general will is also applicable in the modern society with the big states and many other associations which are diverse and powerful, having conflicting interests and creating difficulties for the common good. The theory of general will is objected on the ground that it is not applicable to the large states. It is contended that general will is based on common good, which is to be found in small state or community. It may be said that the improved means of communication are bringing the world together and making possible the general will over large states or large areas also. And the theory of general will is unrepresentable and rules out the representative government has lost its force because of instructed representation, the party system, the press, the growth of professional unions. Overall, these some points are related to critical aspects of the Rousseau's theory of general will. After examining Rousseau's views about his most important theory of general will, we examine about Rousseau's views on sovereignty, because his concept of sovereignty and concept of general will are closely related. Rousseau identifies sovereignty of the state with the general will and with the common interests of the community. The sovereignty of the state is absolute, like that of Hobbes. Hobbes assigns the sovereignty to one person, while Rousseau gives to the whole community. And sovereign cannot divest himself of his sovereignty even if he wishes, like Hobbes. He unites the absolute sovereignty of Hobbes with the consent sovereignty of the Locke into his popular sovereignty. The popular sovereignty of Rousseau's is most important, indivisible, unrepresentable, and very important concept, because it is unrepresentable because it lies in the general will which cannot be represented. So, Rousseau explains his philosophy's most important contribution, most important idea, most important philosophy about the popular sovereignty. Rousseau distinguishes between the sovereign and government. Unlike Hobbes, he rules out representative form of government because sovereign cannot be represented. The deputies of the people are not its representative, but they are only its commissionaries. Every law which is not ratified by the people is invalid according to Rousseau. He assigns absolute powers to sovereign, but he also imposes some limitations on sovereign. Number one, he must not do anything which is not in the interest of whole people. Number two, he must ensure quality of all before law and maintain a rule of justice. Number three, he cannot impose upon subject any restrictions of movement that are useless to the community. In fact, Rousseau's conception of sovereignty is a compromise between absolutism and the constitutionalism. He assigns unlimited and absolute powers to his sovereign because it is the people over whom absolute sovereignty is exercised, and it is sovereign who exercises his absolute powers. So, sovereignty lies in general will of the body politics, which cannot impose any limitations on itself. Moreover, it can have no interest apart from those of the people, and therefore there is no need for any limitations on it. Rousseau considered sovereign as entire community by representing his concept of popular sovereignty. Now I explained you major characteristics of Rousseau's concept of sovereignty. Number one, according to Rousseau, the sovereignty is inalienable as it lies in the general will, which is also inalienable. The general will cannot alienate the sovereignty, and sovereignty cannot alienate its powers. If it does so, it ceases to be sovereign and loses the character of sovereign. Therefore, the sovereignty is inalienable according to the concept of Rousseau. It is also indivisible. Rousseau says that the sovereignty is indivisible. The sovereignty lies with general will, and the general will is indivisible. If general will is divisible, it ceases to exist. Likewise, if sovereignty is divisible, it ceases to be sovereign. So, sovereignty can be divided only with respect to the objects to which its acts directed. Division of sovereignty into legislative, executive, and judicial is not division of sovereignty, but it is division of objects for the sake of efficiency and convenience. In spite of the functional division of sovereignty, the sovereignty remained unified and vested in the people because it is fundamentally indivisible. It is very important point of this discussion. It is also unrepresentable. Sovereignty is unrepresentable because it lies in the community, which is a collective body and cannot be represented by itself. Sovereignty is the will of community, and community is unrepresentable. As soon as the people elect their representative, they are no longer free. Last, it is also unified, and it is also collectively related, integrated with the general will of the society. Overall, if we analyze Rousseau's theory of sovereignty, his views about popular sovereignty, or his views about general will, then we can very easily find out that his both concepts are closely integrated, and both concepts are very important contribution in his philosophy that cannot be denied. Remaining aspects of Rousseau's philosophy, inshallah, examined in next lecture. So that is the end of our today's discussion.